Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, in the next 15 minutes we are going to be discussing with you the biggest thing happening to business at this time, especially businesses interested in sustainability. You're here because you're interested in sustainability, and as we've heard this morning, responsible business, understanding responsibilities, understanding social issues is no longer enough for business. We really need to get to the core of what a business is doing. We need to get to the core of how business is affecting our planet, how business is affecting our environment. And that's what natural capital valuation can do. It can bring it straight to the core of business in relation to sustainability. Because when you think about how you implement sustainability programs or responsibility programs in your company, do you have the tools that really tell you how vital sustainability is for your company and the processes that you have in the company and the products that you make? Do you have the tools that zero in on your real interaction with the natural environment and the natural resources that you use? And do you have the tools that will provide you with the real, tailor-made to your business opportunities in what is essentially the limits planet impose on us? There are lots of tools emerging on valuing, bringing a value of natural capital as natural resources, ecosystem services. Nature is called in relation to business. Lots of tools emerging. And the coalition that I'm supporting is trying to bring that even to a global level to develop a globally acceptable, multi-stakeholder, as it's called, natural capital protocol. Natural capital valuation has been called by many, and I would support that, a true game changer. It's really helping business become smart, understand the shared value, which was mentioned earlier this morning too. Become smart, make the decisions that relate to the business itself in relation to that natural environment. And if I may use Darwin on a conference like this, it helps business, it helps humans, humanity, our societies, the economies we've created within those societies, and the companies within those economies really find out how they fit within that natural environment. Now, I said it's the biggest thing right now for business. In the coalition that I support, we have the multilateral intergovernmental institutions, the financial sector, we have the accountancy firms and the associations, we have business associations, specifically focusing on sustainability, many large businesses, we have NGOs, we have academia, trying to find out what's the best way to value natural capital within that economic setting and in relation to the goals we have to make our planet or to make our society more sustainable fit within that that natural environment that we live in. That's what I have, this coalition, to do this. You have a great panel who know quite a bit about this subject, much more than I do. And we have you in the room. I really hope for the next, probably now, 48 minutes, we can have a discussion with you, really interact and hear what your experience is from this region and in this region with what we call natural capital. But let me first introduce the great panel. First is Kaveh Zahedi. He is the Regional Director and Representative for Asia and the Pacific of the United Nations Environment Programme. Please, you may applaud him when he comes in. We have Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson is CEO of True Cost, truly one of the pioneers in this area, doing this for 12 years already, so he'll know a lot. Please. And another thought leader is Richard Spencer from the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, just arrived from London. So we will apologies for him to have to be awake right now. And he really is also one of the initiators of the coalition that I'm working with. We have for you to interact with us, of course. We have for you to interact with us the pigeonhole, but I know you can put questions in there in an anonymous fashion, but I really do hope you will also use the 4 microphones to interact with us so that we can have an actual discussion with all the experts that are in this room. But we'll start with the panel. And while I get settled, maybe, Kaveh, you can start. How important are ecosystems to business?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. I think before this session, you said to me that all I needed to do was set the scene by telling everybody about all of the planet's ecological challenges and what they mean for business in 3 to 5 minutes. I will do my best. It's not easy, but it's helped by the fact that I think the scene was set by the previous panels, because we heard in the previous conversations this morning about how we are living beyond the planet's means. We heard a little bit about what some would call reaching the planetary boundaries, beyond which we are going to see major collapses of ecosystems and the services that they provide. We've seen this translated visually into the number of planets we're using, or potentially will be using, 1.5 planets, etc., as we move on. And I think the science is now robust enough for us to know that we are using more resources than the planet can generate. And why is this happening? Again, we heard the earlier panels referring to it, that in a way, nature is invisible in economic choices. And its services are more often than not treated as free services. And this is quite remarkable, given the sort of the numbers that we put to the services that these ecosystems and nature is providing to countries, to companies, to businesses, and to us as a society. We know, for example, that the timber industry uses natural capital or services, ecosystem services, to the tune of 400 billion a year, at least. We know that marine ecosystems and fisheries provide ecosystem services of about 80 billion. We know that aquaculture provides ecosystem services of about 60 billion. But still, deforestation is continuing and increasing, and marine contamination is also on the wrong trajectory. We know that half of the 640 billion pharmaceutical industry depends on ecosystem services. It depends on nature and what nature provides. And yet we are in an age of mass extinction of species. Each time you open your newspaper, each time you see the latest red list, etc., we're brought into sharp focus the fact that more and more species are disappearing. Similarly, with the insect pollinators that provide 200 billion worth of services for our agriculture in terms of pollination, again, we're choking them up with the amount of chemicals that we use in the way we use, in the way we grow our food, in the way we are developing. So in a way, all of this is part of what you see in your documents in front of you as the over 7 trillion worth of externalities that are out there. And I think if we consider the environment as a form of capital, which is essentially what we're talking about here, natural capital, then clearly it needs to be measured, that clearly it needs to be invested in, that clearly it needs to be exploited in an efficient manner. And to some degree, it needs to be increased in value. And I think this is what it means if you want to be green, as the previous speaker said. So I think this, for me, is why we are here as a panel, and some of the initiatives we bring from the UNEP side, many initiatives in terms of how do you bring value to this, what has been invisible in the past, whether it's through the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, which has generated some of these numbers that you'll see, whether it's through the Natural Capital Coalition that is helping financial institutions understand their water footprint, etc. So this is, in essence, the purpose of valuing natural capital. And I would say it's not only to expose how huge it is in terms of what we so far have treated as invisible, but also to unleash the opportunities that come with making it visible, the opportunities that come with not discarding all of our plastics into the oceans, but using that material, recycling that material, and reusing that material, and the billions that it's worth. So it is natural capital, and its valuation for me is about unleashing the opportunities for businesses and, of course, for the countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaveh. You just threw out some numbers, 7 trillion, 300 billion, etc. Huge numbers. Obviously, someone has done the math and figured out what things are worth. But you say they're invisible in our economy. I think 7 trillion is about equal to what the economic crisis has cost us, isn't it? And it's on an annual basis. So we're facing an economic crisis on an annual basis, just in loss of ecosystem services or in what's being available to our economy. Someone who's putting those figures to these services is Richard. How deep can you get into a business with these figures?
Well, I think those numbers really come out of an analysis of primary production globally, which shows that essentially if Earth was a capital asset that every business had to account for, and if we aggregate that up, we would have degraded it by at least 60% so far. So if you think then that our economy is supported by natural capital, which it is, then actually we've degraded natural capital by 60%. Now, if you're a finance director or an investor, long-term pension fund, then that's a serious concern, or should be. So for companies, the idea is really to understand the asset that has first of all been unsustainably degraded and how that might affect your business, and then to do something about that and to value the benefit of sustainability. So in terms of some of the work that has been done, I think there's been some really interesting work on valuing the state of nation, if you like, and the value of ecosystem services, put at, say, $7.3 trillion every year in terms of the externalities associated with business activities. But if you take some case studies of how that is actually relevant to businesses, let's take water. So there's a negative correlation between the price of water today and how scarce that water is globally. So that means as businesses, if you're just to follow market principles, you'd be using water where it's scarce. That does not really make sense, because I wouldn't like to bet that in 10 years' time we will be using water where it's scarce and it will be the same price. So that's why businesses, for example, such as Ecolab 3 weeks ago launched a tool called the Water Risk Monetizer that seeks to identify the price differential between the current price of water that you might be paying in a specific location versus the future, potential future value associated with water in that location. Because there is a mismatch. Markets are failing to price externalities. They're failing to price environmental costs, and that means as businesses effectively currently have a free ride, but scarcity is already impacting on that free ride. So if you look at commodity markets are 3 times more volatile today than they were in the year 2000. Now, obviously, the cost of commodities will vary with supply and demand, but the volatility, if you analyze the underlying trigger points of volatility, that is often to do with natural capital constraints. It's to do with floods and droughts and various other related natural disasters and environmental issues. So that's why a lot of businesses are starting to work on ways of developing tools to account and put a price, put a value on effectively those free services that are provided by nature. What is the value of clean air? What is the value of not having air pollution? Because in China, the value of creating air pollution could be up to 10% of GDP. Again, I wouldn't like to bet that if you're a business in China creating a lot of air pollution today, that will not be a cost to you in the future. So essentially, these are forward-looking indicators of future risks. And the flip side of risk is opportunity. So I think a lot of businesses are understanding where they can drive innovation. So one of the things that we did was, with PwC, work on creating an environmental profit and loss statement for Puma, which they've gone on to work as part of a broader initiative with the Kering Group. And they've recently described that process of developing an environmental profit and loss statement as an innovation engine. It identifies where innovation is required, where more information is required to be gathered, for example, from the supply chain. And by using extra data, more information, they've been able to gain insight into how to further develop their business. And there are various other businesses that we work with, such as Natura, and I mentioned Ecolab and Monsanto, and a number of other businesses, such as General Mills, for example, who've looked at their entire value chain For General Mills, they're highly reliant on nature. Commodities, by and large, are failing to price some of the risks until it's too late. And so I think using some of these new tools that are developing and under the Natural Capital Protocol, we're finding quite a lot of businesses not just understanding risk, but gaining advantage in translating that into a better understanding of sustainability for their stakeholders and for their investors.
Thank you very much, Richard. Going straight on the other Richard, Richard Spencer, we're talking about natural capital as an asset to business, as capital underlying business. Is it that easy? Or are there some complicating factors when you talk about natural capital?
Yeah, I think there are. And I mean, if I can sort of set it slightly in the context of the accounting profession. In 2010 at Nagoya, which was the Conference of Parties on Biological Diversity, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's kind of the natural capital equivalent of climate change talks. The Guardian, which is a newspaper in London, ran an article which they entitled "Are Accountants the Last Hope for the World's Ecosystems?", which is kind of depressing, I suppose. And for many wouldn't. But the point is that just making is that unless you make nature visible, will anybody take account of it? And the accountancy profession are the people who own the rights, if you like, or the license to around measurement and reporting and assurance. But in many respects, those are answers. So if the profession really needs to use the license that they get from that with care, they need to be starting to think about the difficult questions. And one of those, I think, is natural capital, because it's very easy when thinking about natural capital, it immediately puts nature in the sphere of business, which makes an awful lot of people feel very, very uncomfortable. You know, capital is not a term of art in the world of conservation or science. It's a term of art in business. And language is not neutral, so it colonizes nature for business. So there's a role, I believe, you know, that the profession is there that needs to ask some of the deeper questions around, well, what does it mean? What does capital mean in this circumstance? Because natural capital is not the same as financial capital. It's not the same as manufactured capital. And the whole idea of valuation is one that is fraught with difficulties, not only from a practical point of view. You know, if one were to kind of oversimplify massively, you can find that moving from a description of an ecosystem to a measurement of an ecosystem to a valuation of it, you are leaving out things not because they're immaterial or irrelevant, but because they don't lend themselves to measurement or valuation. And conceivably, you could get to a valuation that excludes everything you find valuable. But there's also a kind of moral issue as well, which is, you know, we're talking about capital, we're putting it in the sphere of business. There is a large segment of civil society who say don't put a price on nature. And I think what they are articulating is a deep-seated concern about the legitimacy of business to be the guardians of nature. They haven't shown themselves, the business world has not shown itself to be a great protector of the natural environment. It hasn't necessarily, in certain sectors, shown itself to be a great protector of the capital that's naturally its own. So there is an argument, but there is a public concern, and I think, again, the profession can be there acting in a public interest sort of way, thinking about those kinds of challenges. I think also there's a part here to play, which is about what we're talking about here is not carrying on doing what we're doing and just doing it a bit better to save the environment. That's often how it's characterized, and I'd say that's very much the kind of CSR argument. Let's do what we do, but we'll just do it a bit better. Just as our keynote speaker said, we'll turn down the heating a bit. That age of incremental change is gone. That train left. We are in the age where we have to transform. In other words, instead of saying, this is how we do business, what should we do about our environmental limits? We need to be saying, there are environmental limits being breached, how do we do business differently? And that's a systemic question. That means everybody's got to play a part, governments and so on. And there's a big role for the profession there, again, because the numbers that are the representation about how a business is done and the decisions on which a business makes its choices are generally generated by an accountant. And therefore, the accountant can make a different representation that creates a different reality and guides different choices. And I think there's just one thing that accountancy does, it's just there to be seen, is that the whole point of accountancy was invented around capital maintenance. It's about stewardship. Have I created value in my business or have I destroyed it? So if you look at a P&L, it tells you how you performed, how much money you made. If you look at a balance sheet, it tells you how well you stewarded your assets and your liabilities. And I think there's something there that can be taken in terms of thinking about how business looks at natural environments. Think about the way that the original accounts were put together for businesses was about stewardship.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the panel members for introducing this subject. Just a quick sense of the room, now that you sort of get a grasp of what natural capital valuation is. If you could show me a hand, how many people are actually in business working with natural capital valuation tools already that are in this room? 6, 7 hesitant hands. 8. All right, that's not very many. Another question, how many in the room actually have heard about natural capital valuation before this panel or before this conference?
Everyone.
Now, how many of you, that's actually that's more than half. How many of you, now having heard the panel, think it's from a nature's perspective, maybe a bit of a risk to start pricing it? Not in the majority, but it's not. There are some people there. And how many of you think that perhaps this is the biggest thing that's happening to businesses I've boldly tried to present at the start, and could actually help business really understand how it fits within that environmental space that we have left? All right. So to the panel, methodologies aren't perfect yet. Data's missing. There are some issues. Should we develop this a bit further, or should we just start experimenting and doing with pricing nature and seeing how that impacts business? Anyone? Richard, you jump to it.
Well, I think you've got to draw a very clear distinction between pricing and valuing. Mm-hmm. Because the sort of pricing argument is, if you can put a price on something, and that means you can sell it, and if you can sell it, does the owner then do what they want with it? If you're valuing it, you're thinking about its importance. So I think there's a distinction there. But in answer to your question, I think we should get on and do it.
Richard Matheson?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
What's value to you? Price or something else?
I think fundamentally, there's a value and a price, actually. So the price to... people living in Beijing right now, that's a real price. You have to go and buy an air purifier. You might have to pay for healthcare costs because the air quality is so poor. And that is something you're paying and not the company that's creating the pollution. So there is a cost to society today. That's real, that's tangible, that exists today. There's a cost to us developing the business economy, the entire economy in an unsustainable way. And to my mind, we can't sustain development without understanding that cost. So I think we should just be getting on with it. And I do think that what we really actually failed to do is to define the opportunity out of sustainability in financial terms. And I think this is the flip side of that cost. So the opportunity to define sustainability truly in financial terms, which incorporates the cost to society as well as the benefits to business, is to my mind, the greatest challenge we have.
Kaveh, what's that?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I mean, should we wait till we have perfection? I'm not quite sure why within the environment or in issues dealing with environment, the burden of proof is always so much higher than in any other sector. We tend to go to war with much less information, and yet the burden of proof when it comes to environment is set so much higher. So no, I mean, we shouldn't, because we are, I mean, we saw again this morning, we are reaching planetary boundaries. And I think one of the useful things that this valuation brings, it helps us understand the stake that we each have in those natural resources, in the natural capital. Yes, it's free for a while, but the cost is going somewhere, and we begin to understand where that cost is being spread. I think air pollution is a good example, especially in this region, and especially in this country, where we have the annual haze festival that happens with the burning of the peatlands and the forests, right? But it's much more, and then we get the numbers from World Health Organization telling us that 7 million people are dying prematurely every year because of air pollution, indoor and outdoor, and about 70% of those, i.e. 5 million people, are in this region. I mean, these are not values or costs that we can sort of hide and ignore. They're real values, real costs, impacting real lives. The question is, can we make them understandable to business in a way that business can act upon it? And I think that's the value of the methodologies and the tools we bring. And frankly, it doesn't matter which one of these tools is used, as long as they're used and they bring the consideration of natural assets into the broader business and indeed policy-making considerations.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we go into further debate on the pros and cons, I put one question that got 9 votes on the screen, which says valuing natural capital is very complex, but perhaps the person who put it into the pigeonhole could stand up, find a microphone and ask us that question so that we know who you are. You maybe explain why you would like to have this question answered. There you go, thank you.
Hello there. Yeah, my name's James, I'm from Eco Business. And this, the event we had last year focused a lot on natural capital. I agree with everything the gentlemen are saying on the stage, but as I put in my question, it's very difficult to imagine how complex the equation is that puts a dollar value on these externalities. So a couple of simple examples would help me, and maybe some other people, absorb it a little bit better. So we talk about it a lot, natural capital externalities, but an example would be great.
That's why I picked it, because I agree. Maybe 2 or 3 very concrete examples. Richard Madison, probably best placed.
Yeah, so let's, okay, we talked about air pollution. You are running a power station, and your power station is emitting sulfurous oxides, nitrous oxides, particulate matter, like carbon. And quite clearly, each of those has an impact outside of your business boundary. And that impact is actually in various different types to the local economy or the national economy. It can be in terms of healthcare, increased healthcare costs. It can be in terms of crop impacts. So, for example, in Eastern Asia and especially in China, crop yields in China are between 7 and 15% lower than the global average. It could be in acid rain creates damage to infrastructure, creates damage to water. You get loss of productivity from waterways as well in terms of the productive capacity of water for us in terms of fish. Let's take another one, water. How would you price an unsustainable use of water? You'd adjust it for scarcity, frankly. But really what you're looking at there is a way of pricing the water cycle, the provisioning capability of that local water cycle to you. That's effectively what you're pricing. And you might also, in similar ways, look at things like waste streams. You could price, we did actually put a price on plastics in the ocean earlier this year for UN Environment Programme and for the Plastics Disclosure Project. And that was $13 billion a year. So you can understand the price from the perspective. There are various different methods. I would say it's not simple. Economists have been working on this, though, for 40 years plus, and there are mechanisms. It's not simple, though, in exactly the same ways. It's potentially not simple to calculate the value of a business. So if I said to the audience, how would you calculate the value of a business? There are quite a different number of approaches that you may use to value a business. You could use a discounted cash flow analysis. You could look at return on investment, return on capital employed, book value, a number of different approaches. So it's not that simple, and this is not that simple, but it doesn't mean it shouldn't be done.
Great, thank you very much. Also for the 9 people who supported that question. Raise your hand if you felt it was answered, if you were one of those 9. Oh, maybe not. Nobody's raising their hand. I have another, I think, important question, which sort of touches upon and we have 5 minutes to answer it in, touches on the systems question, so to speak. And the question reads, and maybe the person who asked it, if you're in the room, or any of the 4 who thought it was a great question, could go to the microphone and read it, and if not, we'll go and be within our time, which is, how can a business benefit from measuring its natural capital impacts if its shareholders, customers, and governments don't create a framework that brings value to that natural capital? Sort of
Exactly.
This is a society thing, right? A whole of society thing.
Yeah. So, well,
anyone? Richard.
When we set off out on the Natural Capital Coalition project, it was always going to be about the ability to measure impacts and dependencies. And it was always going to be rather pointless if that's where you finished, because you'd say, well, we now precisely know how big the problem is, and everyone goes, but very useful. So we knew it was big, but now we know exactly how big. The point that this question makes is excellent, is what do you do about it? And so what is the combination of hard and soft market mechanisms and regulatory tools that can be used that drive a change in business behavior? Because just by measuring how big these things are doesn't necessarily mean a business is going to take any account of it. So you absolutely need that kind of policy framework around it that makes these decisions relevant to business and would drive why they want to do it.
Maybe to Kaveh, as we're talking about ecosystems, right? It's not like a machine in a factory as an asset that is within the walls and you're in charge of it. You're sharing it with communities, with other companies, with nature itself. Isn't moving into this space where you're getting very close to the heart of what a company is doing and how it relates to the natural environment, and also not very much needed that government steps in and a relationship is developed that's mutually supportive almost in that sense?
I think governments are stepping in, and stepping in quite fast. I think we see a mushrooming of legislation, and we see a lot of countries now looking at valuation of their accounts at the country level, at the national level, and then trying to link that to businesses. And we're working with a few countries to do just that. So the incentives are there. The legislation is coming. Countries are much more aware of what they have in terms of assets. You know, whereas previously the coastline was of zero value in terms of the mangroves, and you could cut those away and put your shrimp farms there. Now the values are being recognized, the values in terms of the protection it provides from storm surges, etc. So it doesn't necessarily, and the price may be slightly different, but it doesn't matter. The point is that the value is no longer zero, and therefore it's not treated as zero in policy making and is being legislated as such. So yes, countries certainly have a responsibility. We're seeing a lot of legislation. And then the flip side, of course, is the customers. More than ever, and it was mentioned in the earlier panel, technology means that people can see where the goods and services, the entire supply chain, is impacting. You know, you have the Global Forest Watch, which is telling you in real time what's happening to forests. And very soon we'll be able to link what's happening to forests with which companies are involved in that part of the forest which is now burning. And I think these double incentives of the governmental legislation that's coming and the technology and awareness of the customer base are going to be huge driving forces.
Right. Richard Matheson, the final word, a game changer?
Yeah.
Well, then there. Thank you. Time's up. We are right on time.